peaceful little town in France hides bloody secrets from the First World War. Fighting raged for years here, where an infamous German stronghold held off the Allies on the front line of the Western Front. Thousands died, many of them buried where they fell, on a battlefield now transformed to verdant farmland. Among the fallen, 3 soldiers whose remains were found here.
He was lying on his left side, with his legs slightly flexed.
Soldiers with no names, unearthed by no man's land. A band of archaeologists, forensic experts, and military historians whose mission is to uncover the past.
German barbed wire. It's heavier gauge than the typical British wire, and it's got a lot more barbs on it.
They are the detectives of the Great War, and they're here to put flesh on those bones, to give names to those soldiers and reveal the way they lived and died. Two years ago, this farmer's field surrendered some of its secrets. The remains of 3 soldiers from the First World War were discovered by a team of battlefield archaeologists. The site is near a sleepy village called Serre in northern France. The bodies found close to the rumored location of an infamous German stronghold, a fortress-like, 3-sided defense called the Heidenkopf. It was a strategic point on the Western Front, jutting out into no man's land. Whomever held it had the advantage, and generals on both sides felt it was worth dying for. Forensic expert Luc Barber's great-uncle was killed by a sniper in the Great War. His body was never found, unlike the 3 soldiers discovered here, one of whom was clearly British.
He was buried with a tunic on. We found the buttons running down the front of the tunic, standard issue British tunic. And the first we knew of his presence was the fact we saw the two toes of his boots were sticking out. And we started to clean back just to see if those boots were on their own or whether they actually had a body associated with them. And sure enough, inside the boots were some feet, and we then uncovered the whole body.
The British body, the chap who was lying out on his back with his fingers clenched up, he was lying directly on top of this white chalk in the trench. Now that means something that you don't normally get with archaeology. We can tell to within minutes when that man was killed.
Andy Robertshaw of Britain's National Army Museum is a military historian. Using trench maps, army files, and battle reports, he and the team were able to pinpoint that moment of death. The unidentified British soldier had met his end on the 1st of July 1916, the first day of the Battle of the Somme.
His particular battalion left their trenches just back here at exactly 8:46. That was all according to plan. But within a few minutes of them moving off, everything went wrong. German shells are falling in enormous numbers. There are machine gun bullets whizzing by. One bomb in each pocket, rifle with his bayonet fixed across his chest, his eyes fixed on the horizon ahead, waiting to see if any sight of the enemy. And his target was somewhere about 300 yards ahead of me.
He was lying with his head in more or less here, with the feet going up slope. His right leg was badly broken, the femur was broken around about here, and wedged against that was a large iron shell splinter.
His right leg was smashed by shell fragments. Massive loss of blood. It'd be natural to roll onto your back to ease the discomfort.
His skull was very badly fragmented. The front of his face was literally just stoved in.
A shell fragment that went through the front and came out through the back, completely scattering the skull. His last few seconds must have been agonising.
There's his right hand, which was clenched, and some of the team actually found it quite emotional to see that. It was a little moment of someone dying, an instant second, when he was hit.
And he finished up lying on his back, staring into the sky, like so many thousand other men on the 1st of July 1916.
A lack of material evidence meant there was no way of identifying the British soldier. He was laid to rest in an unnamed grave overlooking the field in which he died. But the team had found 2 other soldiers in the same location, both of them German. Both of them killed in 1915, defending the Heidenkopf. Among the remains were clues as to who the men were. Now the team want to piece together the stories of these German soldiers and scour the Heidenkopf to find out why this formidable stronghold was worth dying for.
Actually, there's clean here, and then there's a band of dirty that starts here, runs. It's about 4 meters wide. It comes to about here, and there's quite.
David Kenyon is a commercial archaeologist. Using German army trench maps from the time, he's worked out where the Heidenkopf defense should be.
I think that might be the edge of the trench, because underneath this clay is solid chalk, and when they cut the trench, at the bottom of it cuts into the chalk, and all that chalk gets thrown up on top, and when they backfill it, all that chalk rubble goes back in, and it shows up in the clay as a sort of white stripe. So that's the back edge of the trench there.
As the digging continues, Luke Barber searches for the very spot where they uncovered the remains of 2 German soldiers, along with some of their possessions. He's a forensic archaeologist who normally works with the police to identify human remains. He's applying the same techniques here. One particular item found with one of the soldiers' bodies proves to be pure gold.
He had his ammunition pouches still in situ with his belt. The belt was slightly pulled up, as if at some point it had been used to move him. The ammunition pouches were full of ammunition, absolutely stuffed. We had an area here where we think he had his bread bag for his personal equipment, but of interest was the disc.
The young German soldier killed outright by a shell blast was wearing an identity disc. The disc gave him back his name, Jakob Honis.
First, there was the excitement of Jakob's identity disc. And I remember distinctly when we got an email with the first photograph of Jakob coming out. And it was at that point that he really started to come to life for us, and he turned from a skeleton into a person.
Andy Robertshaw took Honis's name as a starting point, tracking him through military archives in Germany to the soldier's hometown, Munchingen.
The idea of the ID tag was that the information on it was useful to the German authorities, but wouldn't give too much information away to an enemy if that tag was captured. So it wasn't meant to have personal details on it.
90 years ago, Honis broke the rules, but Robertshaw is glad he did.
He'd been really naughty and had written his full name and some information about his address on the back, which meant we were able to work out exactly who he was. So had Jakob not taken the time and effort to scratch his name on the back and added even the name of his town, then frankly, we would never have identified him. It required really someone to defy military law, and that makes him much more human to me, much more interesting. Trying to find the house where Jakob was born and lived with his family up until the time he got married. It's number 27. It's got to be around here somewhere. And it's this house here in which he lived with his family. Well, Jakob is born into the middle of the family in terms of the boys. He's the middle son and only really finished his elementary education. He didn't go beyond that. Really, he didn't have what we would regard today as teenage years, because as soon as he left his education, it was straight into work. because although they own a little bit of land themselves, that's not enough to support the family, so it's a matter of getting work whenever it's available, and that's a mixture of work for farmers, and then for a period of his life he's actually working in a brickworks.
Jonas was a working-class boy who struggled to put bread on the table, and his labours didn't end when in his mid-30s he was sent to the front. By 1915, the trenches had developed into intricate cities that snaked their way from Switzerland to the English Channel. They were constantly deepened, constantly strengthened, and repeatedly attacked. The battalion's war diary reveals that on the night before he died, Jakob Jonas was out laying barbed wire. If no man's land can find some near their dig site, it might mean the Heidekopp defense they seek. The stronghold that Jakob Jonas was defending is close by.
Roll of barbed wire. Roll of barbed wire.
Certainly is.
Yeah. I think German. It looks like it's got big spikes on it.
Yeah, it's true.
The German
Martin
barbed wire
Brown is an archaeologist with Britain's Ministry of Defence. He knows that German barbed wire was lethally effective on the battlefield and still looks terrifying, even after 90 years in the ground.
You can still see wire with the twist and still with the rather nasty spikes. There it is. Really nasty heavy-duty German wire. And this is the stuff on the 1st of July during the Battle of the Somme that the British really come unstuck with, because they've been looking from the heights over there and they've been seeing belts of wire, and they know it's here and they know it's nasty, and they've come up against it before, so they've been bombarding massively, and they've been using shrapnel balls, lead shrapnel balls, to try and cut this stuff, and it doesn't do it. It's like some sort of malign version of the Sleeping Beauty, where you have to get through the thicket to get to your objective, and in this case it's a bunch of Württemberg soldiers who are pretty angry because you've just spent the past month trying to shell them and kill them, and now you're walking towards them with bayonets. But this stuff is between you and them. We're an inventive species, not always for the best.
I felt that blast wave there. Did you feel it? Yeah.
Heavy shelling was used to try and breach barbed wire, strung right along the German front line.
Part of the battle.
But Andy Robertshire is not convinced the bombing was effective.
One, two gone.
two
It's
of them,
dropped
yeah.
it in the middle.
Yeah.
Has it made a gap though? There's quite a crater.
For safety reasons, the explosive power of this test is scaled down, and so too is the strength of the barbed wire it's aimed at.
It snapped off as the post broke. It's just broken clear. But the other strands are all in place. We've only cut one strand of barbed wire with what we were doing here. What we've got here is a piece of the real wire. Comparing it to that, you can see it's not as thick. And although we've got a single strand gone, that has just snapped through, I suspect had it been the real thing, it wouldn't have severed that at all. Even if the charge had been bigger, even if we'd had a bit more plastic explosive, this obstacle is still there. It would require days of shelling very accurately to cut this completely and get it out of my way. Certainly I wouldn't want to try and get through this, even after 8, 9, 10 of these. And of course, on a frontage of 18 miles, even with millions of shells, there's always going to be some of that wire there. And it only takes one strand of this stuff to slow you down long enough for someone to shoot you. Men like Jakob out there night after night, putting in the wire, getting it all in place, and then sitting back knowing it's going to be a real obstacle. They've put their sweat into it to make themselves safe.
Another set of remains found at the site in 2003 were also German. So far, this second soldier has no name, but there are many clues as to the type of man he was.
He was lying on his left side with his legs slightly flexed, and he's got his German marching boots on, which you can see the soles still surviving with the hobnails in. What was interesting is roughly where the collar was, we found two larger studs, which probably suggests he may be an officer or an NCO, something like that. Down in front of him here was what we think is the remains of the bread bag, with a number of personal effects in them. We had this harmonica or mouth organ. There was his fob watch here, which had stopped at 6:10. You can still see the seconds and the minutes and the hour hands there. There was a penknife, and interestingly, there was a prehistoric flint tool. In his tunic pocket, we found the remains of tobacco wrapped in newspaper, a tobacco pipe to smoke tobacco with, and there was also the matted remains of what we think may well be a book or something that's certainly paper and all compressed together. Obviously, if we'd allowed that material to dry out, it falls to pieces. So that material we had to keep damp and we had to keep it wet and to get it over to conservation.
A German soldier, perhaps an officer, educated, interested in archaeology himself, a pipe smoker whose possessions included a book, the pages of which could hold the key to who he was, if they can be saved and then deciphered. This soldier's story is not over. The trenches of the Great War became a kind of home to the men who lived in them, a place for personal possessions that would be quickly gathered up and carried into battle when the call came. But Jakob Hones had one item with him that puzzled the team and led them somewhere quite unexpected.
The reason we're here is because of this. And it's the lid from a jar. Glass lid with a transfer on the back. It shows the old store, not this rather smart new place. And it tells you all the things they do and their address. We found this when we were excavating in the Heidenkopf. It was associated with Jakob Hones's body.
Down in his right trouser pocket was a glass circular sort of disc, which when we picked it out we weren't quite sure what it was, but when we were actually looking at it we decided it may have been some sort of pot lid, something like that, which had German writing all over and a picture of a building on it. And this was odd because there was no reason to be carrying this pot lid.
It sort of got us thinking, and we contacted the store and they said they thought this probably came from a jar of dubbin or wax for boots, which is actually exactly the same product we've got here. He'd obviously used the product and he kept the lid. Now the only reason I can think you would do that is because this little object is a souvenir of home. And it's looking at this little object is what he used in those hellish landscapes of the Great War to remind him that actually he was Jakob Hones from Münchingen rather than private soldier Jakob Hones in the 121 Reserve Regiment.
Like the soldiers whose stories they're seeking, the men of No Man's Land are also a long way from home. But just minutes from their dig site is Avril Williams's bed and breakfast. It's the command post for No Man's Land, and it's where it all began.
Right. This here is where No Man's Land started to dig. So they dug a section right the way through and went down, and as an archaeologist dig, when they found the infill, out it all came. We did find a lot of memorabilia, and this I've got up in my tea room. No Man's Land is really almost like one of the units, because they all have different roles and they all live different lives, but they come together and they work for each other. we do care about the soldier in the ground, and if we do find one, it means that that body can have the care and the respect it deserves. Otherwise, if people find them, they strip them, they put their bones on the side of the road, they take everything away from them that makes them human, almost, and they're forgotten. No wonder there's a lot of spirits still around here. I think suddenly we're putting it all to peace. We're making sure that they're resting in peace.
The team from No Man's Land may sometimes find fallen soldiers, but they were formed to seek out and excavate the trenches of the First World War. At Serre, they're looking for the German defence called the Heidenkopf. If they can find it, they believe it could reveal more about the soldiers whose remains were discovered close by.
Super. With the archaeology and the history, we're able to not only find out how they died, but we're able to look at what the conditions were like they lived in. We're able to see features that they helped construct or they tried to take. And what we're going to be able to do is build up a picture of the lives of all those others, the ones whose letters don't survive, the ones for whom we don't have photographs. I see what's beneath this rather bland field, and to give an insight into actually how it looked 90 years ago, when men lived and fought and died in these very fields.
This is a ceramic pipe used for smoking tobacco, and you can see where the stem would have come out from there. Very high angle on the stem, presumably a wooden insert with a mouthpiece, maybe baker-like mouthpiece. And I have to confess, all the pictures I've seen of men smoking pipe in the trenches, that looks like a German one to me. It's typical sort of a very sort of acute angle coming up for the stem. So that's quite nice, just learn on the surface. Someone puffing away on that.
The as yet unnamed German officer was a smoker. He was found with a pipe and tobacco in his pocket. A matted book was also uncovered with this man's remains. It's taken forensic colleagues at University College London months of painstaking work to tease the secrets from its pages.
I remember excavating this. It's got book written on it because that's what we thought it was, because it was the right shape and size. And it didn't even look that good. It was a gungy, rectangular mess.
The process presented the lab with a challenging mini-excavation. As they gently separated it layer by layer, tantalizing clues were revealed.
Here, for example, you're getting this sort of crest, I think. This
Oh yes,
sort
it
of
looks like it's the imperial crown. It's the same one that
Yeah.
appears on the soldiers' buttons. And
Right.
things. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And you're getting things like sort of ghosts of writing.
Oh,
really.
crikey, yes.
Yeah.
Any indication of date on this at all?
Yeah, I mean, on this is the final layer here. We do have a date in the corner here. It's a bit dark, but it's in German, das Jahr 1915 here. So,
1915.
yeah.
But the real
Yeah.
gems, this piece,
yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah, it was very exciting.
Bayer from
Yeah.
somewhere Stadt
Yeah,
and Halle.
yeah,
Halle's Eastern Germany, isn't it? So
yeah,
it's interesting.
yeah.
And
So-
Bankenschaft, so presumably it's our body's bank book.
Yes.
How
that's it.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
that's brilliant, because obviously a bank
Yeah.
account, a bank book has an account,
Yes, that's right.
has an owner.
Yeah.
So this is the sort of thing that's going to get us close to an identification for this chap. This period, not everybody has a bank account, not everybody has a bank book. That is an indication of a little bit of social status. It means that whoever this guy is, he's not just a factory hand or a farm labourer. Because they're the sort of people who wouldn't have had the sort of disposable income to actually be able to think, I'll put some of that away into the bank.
Jakob Honnes was not an officer, and he was found with something far more practical than a bank book.
Well, stop finding things to dig. Right.
When we excavated Jakob Heinz down there, he had one of these in his pocket. And what we've got there is the lens from a soldier's German flashlight. So, you know, you've got the inside as a tin body. Presumably the bulb is still in there, actually. I can see the bulb is still in there. You take it for granted, you just turn the light on at night, but if you're living out here, you know, when you drop things in the trench at night and you're looking for it, although obviously you don't flash it around over the parapet too much unless you want to tempt a sniper's bullet.
Back in Germany, historian Andy Robertshaw is hot on the trail to Ludwigsburg, where Jakob Honnes did his compulsory military service with the 121st, his local regiment.
The whole town is dominated by the military, and it was up until 1994. But when you walk through the streets, when you look around, you can speculate on what the town looked like when Jakob went through the gates for the first time. This is where Jakob Honnes did his military service and all then the periods of service that followed as a reservist. And in fact, behind me are the storehouses out of which Jakob would have received weapons and equipment and uniforms before they went off to the front.
All German men did compulsory military service when they reached the age of 20, drilled over and over again, learning the importance of discipline, learning not to question orders.
It's a curious thought that even in 1900, people were speculating that country soldiers, country boys, probably were going to make better soldiers than people from the cities. People from the cities were apt to think too much and probably were a bit soft on their feet.
Countryman Jakob Honnes left behind a large family deeply dependent on him. He left for the front by rail from Stuttgart, the capital of the German region where he lived. In Germany, a finely tuned train system was crucial to getting troops in position and supplying them.
Places like this were absolutely full throughout August and September 1914. And you can imagine that there's a great sense of anticipation, excitement, men buoyed up by comradeship, and the prospect of going off together to do something. But that's going to be tempered with huge anxiety, and it's not just about the future for themselves, but for the communities they're leaving behind. Imagine this concourse full of soldiers, but also full of families. They must know that this may well be the last time they see that person who is disappearing off onto a train and heading off to war. But if we think about the experience that people like Jakob Honnes may have had, the Honnes family live in a village. He's an agricultural labourer and has a small holding. It's coming to harvest time. It's the worst time to have to go to war. When Jakob Honnes leaves for the front with his comrades, he leaves behind his wife, Mari, 7 children, and she's pregnant. The people who are standing here waving their loved ones off as they disappear towards the front have got a very, very uncertain time ahead of them. And Mari Honnes is very definitely one of those people, poor and with very little prospect of what's going to happen next.
Training could scarcely prepare troops for the reality of trench warfare at Serre. Shells fired by advancing French rained down on German lines in an attempt to destroy barbed wire fences. And the barbed wire found by no man's land was right on target for the Heidenkopf.
So I think we're in about the right place. See, we've got it coming in this way. We've got what looks like a knife rest in there as well.
Yeah, which we've seen before, haven't we?
They found the defence, and both wire and shells are still there.
One of the main things that the British are trying to do with all these shrapnel shells is to cut the wire, the German wire, which is actually in front of the German trenches. And we found in that area down there bits of the actual side of the shell, bits of the exploded fuse, and in a very small area, you know, all of these shrapnel balls. I said there's over 100 of them. Normally the shrapnel shell will explode well above the ground level and spray either troops or the barbed wire to try and cut it. What obviously happened with that one is it was actually coming down. It was actually facing the right direction, so it's coming from the British front line, and it's exploded and shot its shrapnel balls out probably only about 6 feet above the ground, and it's just driven itself in, and the balls haven't had a chance to spread, so they're still in a fairly tight funnel, and they've gone into the ground like that. That's good. Base of a stick grenade.
Oh, lovely.
So you unscrew that, that
Yep.
comes off. What you've still got is the actual paper, the waterproof paper
Seal,
membrane, which
yeah.
you push through, and inside Can you see the actual
Oh, yes.
ceramic pull?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Isn't that great?
To actually get that preservation.
Yeah. If you want a clear image of classic mid-war trench fighting, these are it. This is bombing up and down the trenches around the traverses, trying to either take control of it as the Allies are doing, or recapture it and bomb them out again. And we know that the Heidenkopf down there changes hands several times. And how do you recapture it? This is how you do it. It's done with bayonets, with sharp shovels, and with bombs. This is it. This is the real red in tooth and claw business of trench warfare. This is close proximity killing.
As the war progressed, artillery shelling, the war's great killer, increased at a murderous rate. The Heidenkopf was an exposed position, jutting into no man's land, and artillery rained down on it relentlessly. For the Germans, it was vital their trenches were solid and could take the pounding.
The Germans use this technique a lot. They've used timbering and basically a wattle to build this up with sandbags on top. Trench boards are in there as well, and they've used sandbags on this side to give it more strength. In fact, if you look at this, it's a little bit low because I'm 6 foot tall and my head's at some risk of being shot off. So one thing we might say, it should be a little bit deeper. It obviously has a series of traverses in it. It changes shape, which means you can't shoot straight down it. I suppose this really should be built up high, but that's not been completed. And if we go around here, what you can see is there's then a very, very steep traverse. It goes forward, which gives us a fire bay. But if we look here as well, you've also then got fire steps, which really means that I can put my shoulders up and shoot at my attackers. British are over there, road and a valley in between. This is pretty much how it would have been. High parapet on this side, high parados behind me. It's a pretty accurate representation of what it would have been like.
It's got big fingers.
Up from the mud of the Heidenkopf comes a find that seems to underline the war's great cruelty, a tantalizing hint of lost love.
Well, it seems to be a fingering that's just come out here. But yeah, there's only a brass one. It'd be nice if it was silver or gold, but there may be an inscription on the inside. You never know. We'll get that cleaned up. I think that's worth going for.
Oh, that certainly is excellent. Yeah.
But it's a very personal item, obviously. But it's nice.
Well done.
Now, where's the finger that went with it?
Forensic tests on the ring found at the dig site show that archaeology can be a road with dead ends and promising clues that lead nowhere.
I'm not sure it's a finger ring first because it's a copper alloy, and as far as I know it was not very common to make finger rings of this sort of alloy then. Also, there isn't any kind of surface decoration, there isn't anything engraved on it. It's probably not a finger ring.
When that came out of the ground covered in soil, there was a great excitement because it looks like a ring, and you do leap to the instant conclusion. It would have been nice if we'd been able to say, oh yes, it's a finger ring and it's got so-and-so written inside it. It doesn't. That doesn't diminish its value. It's part of the whole story of that piece of landscape.
The war years were hard for soldiers' wives left to cope back at home. Women like Jakob Honus's wife, Mari.
What we've got here is known as the Little Wartime Cookbook. It's a German-produced pamphlet, 1915. It's not very thick, very cheap paper, and it's the sort of thing that Jakob's wife would have had, which would allow her to be able to produce fairly economical meals with very, very poor ingredients. So what we've done is get all the ingredients together for just a couple of dishes. One is soup of curdled milk, and the other one is called Little War Buttons. Jakob had 6 of his own children and 1 stepchild, so with 8 mouths in the house to feed, food just got more and more scarce throughout the war. Certainly the first winter of the war becomes the turnip winter, and then people are eating whatever there was and substitutes for everything.
like potato pulp instead of flour for the tiny dumpling.
By the summer of 1915, Jakob's wife must have wondered really what it was all about. Her husband's away at the war, she's got hungry children. The naval blockade means there's no fertilizers, there's no foreign sources of food, and the German people begin to starve.
That's the day. So I'm going to put some lemon in to sour it. The caraway seeds in as well.
Anything on hand was used to try and flavour bland food.
What was the war to them? It was nothing but suffering. Should we try? I'll try one as it is, actually.
I would have thought so.
Yeah, okay. What's it like? Is it?
It's just...
It's boring.
It's boring.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for those caraway seeds,
There would be nothing to
there'd
it.
be nothing to it.
No, no.
No. I mean, this is pure stodge, isn't it? Oh.
The team have dug deep into 34-year-old Jakob's past. They unearthed a very personal link from his cold and muddy trench to the warm kitchen and wife he left behind. Postcards sent back from the front by Jakob Honnes to his wife Mari in April 1915.
His writing on the back. That's really quite spectacular. This is somebody that we found, we've excavated, we've got a photograph, we've got his handwriting. What's great about these cards is that they really show us what the soldiers are concerned about, what Jakob, what this man here is concerned about. And it's not news about we were in trenches and we saw the French and all those kind of things. It's, did you get the money I sent you? Did you get the knee warmers? For Jakob Honnes, who he's thinking about most of the time are Mari and the children. I think the most poignant message here, Jakob writing back to Mari and the children, and he says, I reckon that we've seen the most of this after all. This isn't quite, it'll all be over by Christmas, but he's saying he thinks the end's in sight. Well, unfortunately for him it was, because within 2 months he was dead.
In the Great War, men at the front were photographed. The pictures were then issued as postcards for the men to send home to their families. This is probably the last photograph Jakob Honnes ever posed for. On the night in June 1915, before he died, German records show Jakob Honnes was out stringing yet more barbed wire to secure the defences of the Heidenkopf.
I'm going to lift this barbed wire. It's leaning against the edge of the trench. What we've got here is the end of a roll, and it's got a hollow through the middle of it where you could have stuck a fence post through it, which of course you would need the fence post to put the wire up. That gives you something to carry down through the line. And at night the trenches were alive with men carrying supplies and stores up and down, including this sort of thing. And there were wiring parties sent out into no man's land just out there, and under the cover of darkness they would repair and build the fences to keep the British out. It's one of those jobs that must have been absolutely horrendous. You have to go out under cover of darkness, try and build a fence, avoid the shell holes, avoid the unexploded things, and try and not make a noise, because there are sentries over on the other side of the line just waiting to hear coughing, knocking, people dropping tools, and then all hell broke loose.
Every soldier in every army believes in a certain amount of luck. Jakob Honnes was no exception. He carried a boot polish lid, a souvenir of home, a lucky charm. But the following day, Jakob Honnes's luck ran out.
The regiment that holds this bit of the line is the 121st Regiment. Jakob is in number 7 company. The biggest job that they've got is digging. They're digging very hard and they're doing this work in the night. Vast amounts of wire goes in to making this position virtually impregnable. Working in the dark, trying to do it with a constant threat of death if you make too much noise. And he would have always known that if you get it wrong, it would only require a single flare going up, chance, burst of machine gun fire, and that's the end of it.
The remains of the second German soldier were found close to Jakob Honnis, but unlike Honnis, this man was an officer, educated and better off, carrying a bank book that offered the team an outside chance to identify him.
You can see basically the outline of the book here with all the cover, fragments of cover coming off it. So very, very delicate, very fragile. But we saw that actually the main wad of paper of the book itself, when we peeled some of the pages back, we could see the stamp, the printed German writing, and we knew that we had something that could potentially be quite important. The tunic buttons and the collar studs, which were Württemberg, told us he was a Württemberger and told us that he was also an NCO from the collar studs. But it was this bank book, this soggy piece of paper, which was the crucial clincher. The historians were feeding us information through via emails and things that they were on the track and they had some clues to follow up. And it was great when we finally I got an email through saying, we've got him, he's Albert Thielecker. It really does emphasise to you the fact that when these bodies are dug up, you need to look at every last piece of evidence, because Albert Thielecker was identified not from his buttons, not from his dog tag, but from his bank book.
Albert was in the same regiment as Jakob. They died at the same time, officer and infantryman united in death.
The regiment that holds this bit of the line is the 121st Regiment of the line, reserve regiments. It's made up of 3 battalions. Each of those battalions have 4 companies in it. Jakob is in number 7 company and Albert is in number 9 company, which means that actually in terms of the way they work in the line, they tend to rotate. So you put in one battalion, it serves for a while, then another one comes in. So they probably would have been in the same unit without knowing each other. There's a big social divide between a private soldier and a junior officer.
They died defending the Heidenkopf, which in 1915 was only a reserve line. But the Germans knew it occupied a significant location, and the work carried out by Jakob, Albert, and others like them made it virtually impregnable, laying the ground for German success in the Battle of the Somme the following year.
Did they die in vain? Well, militarily, no. For their families, arguably yes. They died to hold this position, and they continued to do that until we found them.
We're 18 months on now from when we were excavating at Serre and we first found the 3 sets of remains, in particular these 2 German sets. And it's been a long road since. In France, the missing crop up from time to time. You see them recorded in the newspapers. They'll say, oh, another British soldier's been found or a German soldier's been found. And we like to feel that we've moved the process on a bit now and that we've raised the bar, if you like, that when these remains crop up in the future, there will be a stronger imperative for people to really take the trouble that we took and treat them archaeologically from the moment of discovery.
It is putting names to bodies, it's making them human again. And it brings the Great War to the current time. And I think it's so nice to bring the link through from here as a soldier in the field. He's a pile of bones now with some equipment attached to him, and he is now this person.
you don't choose them, they choose you in a strange way. And when you then see a name like that on a headstone, it is just a feeling of a job well done.
At the end of the day, the First World War soldier must never be forgotten. He gave his all, didn't he? He gave everything.
If names can be put to bones, then the sacrifices of the Great War will not be forgotten. Young men, allies or enemies, united in death by the eerie comradeship of the fallen.